Welcome, football fans, to a very special reaction video on the Bottom Line View. Typically, I'm reacting to Colin Cowherd, or I'm reacting to Nick Wright say something outlandish about the Kansas City Chiefs. But today, we're reacting to our very own. That's right. We have our boy Ultra here, a project of his own. The last 25 years of the NFL has seen a lot of great quarterbacks. Ultra has narrowed it down to 25. So we are going to react. I have not seen the list. The best 25 quarterbacks from 25 to 1 of the last 25 NFL seasons. If that sounds good, Gronk, spike the like button. Don't be a jabroni and subscribe and give some love to a longtime BLVer Ultra in the comment section below. Let him know what you guys think about his list. Welcome, Mr. Ultra, to the Bottom Line View. He is a BLV versus Consensus podcast member, and he's ready for his time to shine. What's up, Ultra?
Doing well, excited to do this list. And I just thought as I was finishing it, there's nobody better to talk about this very subject with than Mitch Mullaney himself, because he has been watching the NFL since I believe around the start of like 2002, I think. Was it the year after the
Yes,
Patriots won their
around
first?
there. I mean, I was very young.
You've
About
basically watched all of this happen. And so I think you have a unique perspective because you saw all of it. You remember all of it pretty much.
the 25 greatest quarterbacks of the 21st century, according to Ultra. Now, the criteria: Ultra, longevity, statistical production, playoff performance, awards and accolades, dominance at the position / their peak performance, and winning. Is there anything you want to add here before we get into the list?
Maybe you can interpret a little bit of the eye test there as well, because that obviously plays a little bit of a factor into it, but that's mostly the criteria. Remember, this is based only on what a quarterback has done from 2000 onward. So, like Brett Favre. Brett Favre, spoiler alert, is on this list, but I'm not taking into account what Brett Favre did in 1996 or 1997. That's not a part of this list. Kurt Warner is on this list. His 1999 season where he won the MVP and won Super Bowl MVP, not a part of this list, not considered at all. It's a rich tapestry of what I consider when evaluating quarterback. Keep in mind that I'll default more towards accolades when comparing players I wasn't old enough to see personally. I inherently don't have as much nuance when comparing those guys. So guys that I saw over the last 15 years since I've been watching football, I have more nuance. I have a better idea of who was actually better, who I thought was better when they were playing. Whereas guys in the early mid 2000s, I don't have as much inherently because I wasn't watching football. I wasn't old enough at that time. So I'll default more towards the accolades and the stats and the resumes in that case. But yeah.
At number 12, we got Brett Favre, who I just saw the other day throwing piss missiles at 50 years old to receivers who were like grunting and groaning that he was throwing the ball so hard at them. So, yeah, this guy had one of the strongest arms of all time, but his success primarily came in the 90s. That's where all of his MVPs stemmed from, right, Ultra? And then also his Super Bowl and both Super Bowl performances. So for him to still rank this high from 2000 on, I think speaks to him being a at least top 7 or 8 quarterback of all time. And a lot of people's favorite quarterback of all time, I would say, especially for a certain generation.
My dad. Yeah,
For
my
the
dad's favorite
style
quarterback.
that he played, he was very fun and electric. And I think a lot of young fans don't realize how gifted he was. I mean, just ridiculously creative. And also, even when he was like 40, like there's highlights of him throwing to like, is it Sydney Rice? Like
Yeah.
absolute bombs, like on 4th down, rolling to the right, throwing across his body for touchdowns at the end of games. So he was an interesting guy because I feel like, too, a lot of new fans would look at a lot of his mistakes or turnovers and be like, well, he wasn't that good. But then at the same time, I think they're discounting what his ability was and then also some of the accomplishments he had. So Take it away. Brett Favre still at number 12 despite not including the 90s. He
Mitch,
might have been the
read
best quarterback in the 90s.
Mitch, read that second line of the accolades I
4
put in.
top 5 MVP finishes.
That's just since 2000. So even though he didn't win
Wow.
an MVP, he finished in the top 5 4 separate times. He led the
And
league in touchdowns.
Ultra, if only he would have won the 2007, 2008 NFC Championship, he would have lost another Super Bowl, bro. If only.
4 and 09, maybe they would have beaten the Colts. Who knows?
Honestly, maybe.
It would have been. I mean, that was really. I mean, the fact that they lost in a regulation and overtime of both of those games
Yeah.
is kind of crazy. But led the league in touchdowns in 03, finished top 5 MVP in 01, 02, 07, and 09. So Brett Favre, 6 Pro Bowls. I always think if you make 5+ Pro Bowls, you kind of have a Hall of Fame career at that point. You were considered a very good career for at least half a decade. That's 6 for Favre. He, in the early aughts, was still great. I think maybe you have some memory of it. He was still awesome. There was the game on Monday night with his dad dying.
Yeah, that game, yeah.
And he had that memorable. Do you think Brett Favre, at his peak, was like the most popular NFL player ever?
I wasn't alive for it, so I don't know for sure. He was,
It just seemed
for
like
his era, certainly. I feel like when I started watching, I want to say like of the youth, Michael Vick was the most popular player.
Vic, yeah.
And like Peyton Manning and then you got to like LaDainian Tomlinson and Tom Brady, but I feel like Brett was a little bit before me at his absolute peak of popularity. He kind of like, honestly, when I really started watching until when he retired, he was like, it was weird. He was a legend the entire time. Like he had already established himself.
Well, because he was
That's
a
how
Hall
long
of
this
Famer.
guy's career
Because
was.
he was a Hall of Famer before.
He was
this.
already a Hall of Famer, and he was already like
Yeah.
seen as like this, like, because Marino was retired, right? Like Jim Kelly had retired, Troy Aikman had retired, all these guys that were of his era. John Elway had retired. He was the last guy of like the era before where he had the carryover.
And then you had Manning and Brady.
And it lasted forever. He just kept
Yeah.
going.
And I mean, he retired in 2010. What forgets is in 09, you can make an argument that year he was the best quarterback in the NFL. He was amazing. he finished top 5 in MVP. He was amazing in 07 with the Packers. Jets, kind of hit or miss. But they still went 9-7, which
when
is like
you really
better.
look at it though, and you're like, oh, it was on the Jets.
Yeah, I mean, 9 wins
fair.
with the Jets is what, like 12 wins with the Ravens.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, there were a lot of great seasons for him early in the 2000s. Had a bit of a lull the last couple of years with Green Bay, and then he had 07, and then 09, and then obviously 2010 was a total disaster, and he retired. But the playoffs with Brett Favre, not great. I mean, a couple of those games early in the 2000s with the Packers, a lot of interceptions in those games. He had a lot of interceptions, and he had a lot of ups, and he had a lot of downs in the 2000s. That's why his best stretch will always be that 95 through 98 kind of period. But he had a lot of great moments, and I think that part of his career, that early 2000s Green Bay portion, gets very underrated when we talk about how great Brett Favre was and when we talk about his career, because that he was one of the best quarterbacks in the league during that period. And he did also have a couple of great seasons towards the end of his career that definitely solidified him, in my opinion, at least as a top 10 quarterback ever. So
longevity was crazy.
Yeah.
At number 11, Donovan McNabb respect. Big Al's going to like this one. Wow. Okay. So yeah, Donovan McNabb was a quarterback, like definitely when I started watching, where it was like, he was low key a top 5 quarterback in the league pretty consistently from like, I would say like 02, but even more so like around 04, 05, when I was really like diving into the NFL, he was considered right after Brady, Manning, and like he was like maybe third. Like he was really good at that time. And he was athletic. He was a different style too. He was athletic. He He was creative. He had a big arm. He could throw the ball down the field, but he was also a pocket passer and obviously played with in Andy Reid's system. Those Eagles teams were awesome. I think they kind of fell victim to having to play the Patriots, and they were the best team in the NFC that era. And I think a lot of it was because of Donovan McNabb's consistency, and he was also a very high draft pick. So yeah, very good player. I feel like probably the guy that's forgotten now in terms of Andy Reid quarterbacks.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. And I made a mistake. He finished second in MVP voting in 2000, not fourth. That was bad by me
Okay.
on my part. But that even enhances him being here. Like even before you started watching the NFL, Donovan McNabb finished second in the NFL in MVP voting.
And I think like 04 was his best season.
In terms of statistics,
and I don't know if he got any votes because Peyton got all the votes.
His two best seasons statistically were 04 and 06.
Okay,
so
06 too, yeah. And then even they had a run in 08 too. They went to the NFC Championship.
Yeah, they went to the NFC Championship. They made the playoffs in 09. They were the best team in the NFC of the 2000s in terms of consistency, and a lot of that had to do with Donovan McNabb. In terms of Andy Reid quarterbacks, nobody ran that system better until Mahomes, obviously. And 4 straight conference championships is really fucking hard. And the fact that they got to the Final Four 4 straight years is really impressive. They lost to the greatest show on turf, Rams in 01. The Bucks, legendary defense in 02. Panthers in 03, that was probably a game that they should have won, if we're being honest. And then 04, they lost to one of the best teams ever in the 04 Patriots. So that was a really impressive stretch. And then in 08, they came excruciatingly close to getting to another Super Bowl in 08. They lost an extremely close game to the Cardinals, and I thought they matched up a lot better with the Steelers than the Cardinals did that year, and the Cardinals almost won themselves. So that might have been their best chance to win a Super Bowl. Who knows? But a lot of really good seasons, 6 Pro Bowls, which I think is super impressive, and consistently among the top 10 and top 5 in terms of passing leaderboards and stuff like that. And 9 playoff wins for a quarterback is pretty impressive.
He had TO for a couple of years, but before that, a lot of Eagles fans would argue he was elevating the receivers. They never had great receivers. That's why they went out and they got TO. And that's really what took them over the top as a team. And that was one of the most dangerous combos in football. And then he also got Deshaun Jackson a little bit later, which was a really fun combination to watch because he could launch the ball and Deshaun Jackson would just run under it.
Do you think him showing up fat in the Super Bowl and that game being so kind of an uneven performance? Because the stats aren't horrible, but they're not good either. And is it just kind of like, is that why people kind of hate him? Because
I don't know why people hate him.
He's like,
the end of his career was a little rocky, but that's like a lot of quarterbacks, like the whole Washington thing and all that stuff. But I don't really know why people hate him. I really don't have a good idea. I don't think he was overly charismatic or like he didn't have like a gravitational pull of a personality. I'm not really sure what it was, to be honest. Maybe it was the fact that he was so close so many times, but he never actually won. I don't know, man. Entering the top 10. We've got 4 years from Rich Gannon, or I guess 5 seasons technically.
Yeah.
From Rich Gannon. 02 MVP, John Gruden's boy, 2-time first team All-Pro, 3-time Pro Bowler, 2 top 5 MVP finishes, and of course, the quarterback that lost in the snow to Tom Brady. Just pointing that out. Yeah, Rich Gannon was actually low-key Ultra. You might not know this trivia about me. He was my first favorite quarterback.
What? Wow.
Actually, I think it was Madden 03, and I would play with the Raiders. They were like the first team you could select. So Rich Gannon was like my favorite quarterback or something. Madden 02 or Madden 03, something like that. So I would play with Rich Gannon and the Raiders. And like right after that, I kind of fell in love with the Patriots. So actually, I was low-key, like very shortly when I was very young, a Raiders fan. And Rich Gannon was. Wow. And it's funny that he wears 12. But yeah, Rich Gannon was awesome. Got to a Super Bowl, MVP. Really a weird career because it took off late in his career. And I think, a lot of his success also is partnered with John Gruden, because a lot of people looked at John Gruden for being able to take Rich Gannon and kind of mold him into this great quarterback that before he wasn't. So, what's your thoughts on Rich Gannon?
Here's why I have Rich Gannon so high. It has to do with that second line, two-time first team All Pro. That means in a season, according to the voters, he was viewed as the best quarterback in the NFL in two separate seasons. That to me makes him. If I were voting, I'd vote Rich Gannon as a Hall of Famer. That's how highly I.
Wow.
That's how highly I hold that
This
accolade.
is an ultra looking at the Pro Football Reference.
Yeah, Rich Gannon led the NFL in passing in '02. Led the NFL in passing yards per game in '02, won league MVP in '02, got to the Super Bowl in '02. A lot of success in that 2002 season. '01 had a great season, obviously. 2000 was a great season as well. First team All Pro that year. I understand what you're saying with John Gruden, but I also think a lot of the best years with John Gruden came with Rich Gannon as well. So I think in a lot of ways they kind of helped each other. And I also think that when you're watching Rich Gannon, I do think some people don't give him enough credit for his command of the line of scrimmage. Like I remember watching a couple years ago, I watched that Tuck Rule game, and he stayed pretty composed despite what was going on in those conditions in terms of making checks at the line of scrimmage, doing things like that. It was pretty impressive considering everything that was going on in that game. And so look, it's a really short career. It's another one like Kurt Warner where it's tough to evaluate, right? Because you kind of have to weigh longevity, but you also have to weigh what he was and what he accomplished. But ultimately, I feel like he did enough to where he warrants being one of the 10 greatest quarterbacks of the last 25 years. I think he earned that in his dominance.
9 is Phillip Rivers. So this is interesting, man. Like Phillip Rivers had the volume stats, but he never had the playoff success. He was so much fun to watch, had a crazy personality. He was always one of those guys you would always want to tune into the Chargers with like 3 minutes left in the game, because you'd see Phillip Rivers just going like this, like going crazy, like the facial expressions, and then you would see him orchestrate this great drive out of thin air. Rivers was, I think, right below, in terms of ability, like right below that elite of his era. He was like right below that, kind of underrated, went through a lot of coaches. And I thought he was able to be successful as an individual, successful as a team with multiple coaches, which is good. But then also, like, was he the reason that he got all these guys like go and fired? Because was he inconsistent, or was it the team? Was it the franchise? What was it? Right. And then there was rosters where stacked teams, but the '06 team that I always talk about, it was a little too early. It was his first year starting. '07, he just ran into the '07 Patriots, which I don't really blame him for. And then
And he had a
really
torn ACL.
and then he had some nice moments as well, like upsetting Peyton. He got Peyton with, it felt like, regularity. And then a little
Yeah.
later in his career, it felt like he went a few years without good teams or good rosters, but he was still able to elevate the offense, play at near MVP levels in years like 2010 off the top of my head. And then later in his career, he was just one of those guys where he was still good, but I think he wasn't able quite to capitalize on his prime, because the teams in his prime were not as good as early or later in his career. It was kind of like a little bit like Tony Romo, a little bit.
Yeah. So Philip Rivers, that first line, 8 Pro Bowls.
Mm-hmm.
Super impressive. If you look at every quarterback that has that many or more Pro Bowls to their name, all of them are either Hall of Famers or future Hall of Famers. And then there's Philip Rivers and Russell Wilson, who people still kind of question if they are. But that figure is ridiculously impressive. He led the NFL in completion percentage in 13, led the NFL in yards in 2010, touchdowns in '08, and then passer rating in '08. So he led the league on all 4 of the major basic passing statistics at least once. There was definitely a period. There was a period from 2008 to 2010 where, if you look at every quarterback cumulatively statistically, Philip Rivers matches up favorably to basically all of them. Manning, Brady, Brees, Rodgers entering his prime during that time, statistically right in line, as good, if not even a little better than all of them. I think the best year of his career was actually that 2009 season. They went 13-3. That was a team that was not the stacked team in '06 and '07. LaDainian Tomlinson was there, but by that point he was averaging 3.3 yards a
They
carry.
lost
Didn't
to the Jets.
Yeah,
I
like they
remember.
had, they had
I
Vincent
was
Jackson.
in San Diego
Their
watching that
D,
game. I was
yeah, that
not
was
at the game, but I was at a bar. I had a lacrosse tournament, and I was watching that game, and they lost. That was
that was a
tough.
that was a huge upset, but that was the best season of his career. If 2009 Philip Rivers had been there in '06 or '07, maybe he has a Super Bowl. It was just a little bit too late.
I'm just curious, Ultra, because very good player, but I think a lot of people would put him in the same lane as Ryan or Stafford, like those
What I,
type of guys.
Here's
What
why I differ.
separates Rivers from those
I
guys?
feel like Rivers had more. The Pro Bowl figure is a big part of it. He has at least double, if not more, than all of those guys. Than Stafford, than Eli, than Cam, than Josh Allen, than Matt
Would
Ryan.
you also say the fact that he was in the AFC hurt him
That
or
all,
help him?
no, I think it helps him. I actually think the fact that he was able to he beat Peyton Manning in the playoffs as many times as Tom Brady did. Nobody
Okay.
talks about that. He beat Peyton Manning in the playoffs as many times as Tom Brady did. He never was able to get by Brady. That was a regular. That was he was vexed by Tom Brady throughout his career, and the Patriots in general, because Brady didn't even always play well in some of those. Like the '06, '07, he threw like 3 interceptions, but Rivers
Yeah.
was bad in those games too. But the other thing was in 2018, he came back. He had a great year. In 2013, he had a great year. He even had other years like 2017 where he was pretty good. I just think he had more high level elite MVP caliber seasons than the other guys did. I think you look at '08, that was the year where the team didn't do very well, but statistically he was right there, maybe the best quarterback in the league statistically. '09, like I talked about, 2010, maybe the most unlucky team in NFL history. Uh, so there were just I think there were more top level seasons from Philip Rivers, along with the Pro Bowl figure that differentiates him from those other guys, as well as the fact that his volume stats are very impressive. If you want to make the argument against Philip Rivers being a Hall of Famer, it has to do with his constant in the second half of his career, seemingly not coming through late, throwing an interception on the final drive, something like that, and his playoff numbers aren't very impressive. If you wanted to put someone like Matt Ryan or Eli Manning or Matthew Stafford above him, all of those guys had much better playoff numbers than Philip Rivers did. So that's
Hmm.
an argument against him. But Rivers, I just think, had more, high level, elite level seasons than those guys did. And that's why I have him where he is. I really respect Philip Rivers. And I think he's somebody that I hope doesn't get forgotten. I'll always remember whenever the Chargers were on Sunday Night Football, he'd do something dumb with his face. So yeah, Philip Rivers, to me, a Hall of Famer and an NFL, one of the best quarterbacks since 2000.
At number 8, dangerous. Mr. Unlimited, Russell Wilson, Super Bowl champ, nearly a 2-time Super Bowl champ. 10-time Pro Bowler is outrageous. I
No,
didn't know that. 2017 passing touchdown leader, 2015 rating. And from I would argue 2014 through 2020-ish, he was a top 5-ish quarterback in the league.
I would say 2015 to 2020. I think 2015 was the best season of Russell Wilson's career. I thought, if you remember back, the Seahawks started like 4-5 or whatever. They were kind of, people were wondering if that Super Bowl broke them, and he went crazy at the end of the year. He had his most efficient year. There was the early part of his career where he put up very good efficiency stats. The yards per attempt, the passer rating was high. He had a great deep ball. Oh, still has one of the better deep balls in the NFL.
Yeah.
Still, like, there are plays with George Pickens where he's
He
throwing.
is such an interesting player because you kind of see as he's gotten older what his deficiencies have been the entire time. Like middle of the field passing, precision, drop back passing,
Making sacks.
I think there's a reason he was never a volume passer because that's where his deficiencies would come. But he was always one of the more efficient guys, never turned it over, knew how to win in big moments because he was one of the more explosive quarterbacks. whether it be
Yep.
running, scrambling, finding a throw down the field. His arm at his peak was pretty ridiculous. He could throw the ball from basically any position. Like he had this baseball style of just like ripping the ball. Like he made some of the craziest throws to guys like Tyler Lockett and Doug Baldwin, like just rolling out and throwing absolute missiles in the rain. He'd play in the rain a lot. There were so many games too when he was early in his career, 2012. I was at one of them, Patriots. You know, he wins that like right at the end, or like 2013, 2014, 2015. It felt like there were so many games where they were in a defensive struggle and he would just pull it out of nowhere. I remember one on like Monday Night Football against the Washington at the time Skins, and he was bad the entire, and then like at the last drive he just pulls it out like just Russell Wilson. So
The
he was
2014
very
NFC Championship game, he was
horrible.
horrendous.
And then he had two of the craziest plays you've
Yes.
ever seen in your life. Yeah, he was crazy clutch. Like he was really clutch, and complimented, a defensive team in the manner that like a lot of the guys previous to him, like let's say like Terry Bradshaw, Joe Montana, all the winners like Troy Aikman, Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, all the guys that have won like multiple Super Bowls at periods or stages of their career, it was a great defense with a combination of a clutch quarterback play. And it was like Russ was kind of in that next, he was like there too.
I'm
So,
surprised you didn't throw in the sneak diss of saying Mahomes 2 years ago, but
well, that was
but
after Russ. So I was thinking of the guys before him. Like, and Russ had that immediate success, early success, right? And basically he's fallen off because his traits have never really allowed him to age gracefully. But his early stages and his prime were awesome.
he's really only had one complete disaster of a year, and that was
That's true.
2020.
I mean, he's won a lot of games
Even
consistently.
that, like even the last couple years, his numbers look okay. Like with Pittsburgh
Maybe
and
it's
the
more of an eye test thing.
he's definitely not what he was. He
Yeah.
had it was the first 3 years of his career, like we talked about. He was a winner. I remember the first playoff game. He almost came back from 20 down to take the lead against the Falcons with like less than a minute left, and then Matt Ryan drove down the field and won it with a field goal. That was a crazy playoff game. Of course, you know Russell Wilson very well with the Super Bowl that probably should have won. That was one of the worst plays in NFL history. But I mean, he had that stretch, and then from about 2015 to 20, where they got worse as a team, but he got better as a player, kept
Yeah.
them in the playoffs basically every year, won them a couple division titles, put up some impressive statistics. There were a couple years like 2015 I mentioned. 2019 was another really good year for Russell Wilson. 2020, 2018, that kind of period. So a lot of really impressive years for Russell Wilson, a lot of wins, a good amount of playoff wins and playoff success, and 10 Pro Bowls again is pretty ridiculous.
That's
He is
crazy.
a Hall of Famer. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. Oh boy, at number 7. So this is interesting. He's got 2 MVPs. He's right now considered a choker. Right now.
Yeah.
Uh Offensive player of the year, 3-time All-Pro. He did get the All-Pro this year over Josh Allen, whether you believe that to be correct or not. And I would even argue I don't think he deserved last year as MVP over Josh Allen, but that's a different discussion for a different day. It's interesting that he's this high, considering, Russ never won an MVP, but he did win a Super Bowl, and he went to 2 Super Bowls. And so, like, that's where I kind of want to hear from you on Lamar. It's like, because we talked about Josh, where Josh is like 10 spots lower-ish, and would you say that Lamar overall has been better than Josh? And I
In
know
terms
that
of the accolade,
the
here's
accolades, but like
here's
the
the difference
actual
between Lamar
play.
and here's the difference between Lamar and Josh to me is the accolades. The 2 MVPs, but especially the 3 first team All Pros and the Offensive Player of the Year, and the fact that Lamar, in terms of his running, has been so also not only influential, but it's just been like breathtaking at times, especially in that 2019 season, that it was like it just felt like such a like wave. I remembered throughout the middle they played the Rams on Monday night and he just eviscerated them. Like it was just ridiculous to watch him that year. The big okay, so the playoffs with Lamar. That's where it comes in because he right now is talked about the way Peyton Manning was talked about 20 years ago, basically. Where this guy,
Basically.
he's the regular season guy. He's the best quarterback in the NFL from early September to early January. In mid to late January, can he play well? Can he get to February and play well? That's the question. I think he has made in the last 2 years some positive steps forward. I think in 2023, he played really well against the Texans, did not play well against the Chiefs. This past season, played really well against the Steelers, and had a couple rough moments, had some bad moments in the first half against the Bills, but
Yeah.
composed himself, ended the game with fine numbers, good numbers even, and threw what should have been a game-tying 2-point conversion to Mark Andrews, and what happened there. But statistically in the regular season, man, that's the other thing. His statistics, especially from an efficiency perspective, this past season was historically great in terms of adjusted net yards per attempt, in terms of passer rating, in terms of yards per attempt, in terms of that stuff. It was ridiculous. 41-4 touchdown interception ratio, a 120 passer rating. Like it's absurd. Even in 2019, some of the passing stuff was pretty awesome. And of course, in the 2019 season, the rushing stuff was off the charts. There's also the fact that he's 70-24 as a starter, which is a ridiculously high winning percentage. So I understand the playoff stuff. I understand the short career. And that is why number 6 is above Lamar, even though from an individual's perspective, he's not even really close to as accomplished as Lamar is already. But Lamar has done so much as an individual in the regular season, and he has won so many regular season games, and he's been so good statistically that I have to put him at 7. I think he's already, in my opinion, no doubt, a Hall of Famer.
Debate it in the comments, guys, because just from like, I'm just listening to this and I'm just like, yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. And from an accolade standpoint, yeah, he's probably in the top 10. But I'm like, I can think of all the times I've rated Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson.
I get it, but
And
there are
it's
also
like, I think the
I think
differentiation, it's so hard.
this is where our difference of opinion, because there have been years where I put Josh Allen above Lamar, and there have been years where I put Lamar above Josh Allen. I think the years where I don't think those years where I've put Lamar above Josh Allen, like the last two, you agree with, which is kind of where that
Yeah,
disagreement is, right? So,
it's
yeah.
interesting. Ben Roethlisberger. Now, I do agree that Ben deserves to be ahead of Lamar because he did more in the playoffs. He won 2 Super Bowls. I think it's as simple as that. And I think he has the longevity as well. He was at one time, I think the versatility of his career is pretty interesting too. The young stages, he won immediately, just like Lamar, got to the AFC Championship as a rookie, and then won the Super Bowl in year 2. Very similar to Russell Wilson that way. And basically sustained like the number 2 status in the AFC for a minute there. And it felt like he was kind of underrated throughout his career, honestly. Like as a passer, as a player, his escapability, his break sack ability, his big arm, his ability to throw the ball down the field, his creativity, his pump fake. He was not as good at the line of scrimmage and things like that as guys like Brady and Brees and Peyton, but he had this like different flavor of like creativity and just raw ability that was pretty fun to watch. And he had that versatility, like I said, where early it was like they had great defenses and he was pretty clutch too. And then later in his career, the defenses weren't quite as good and they could never really find that magic. So they never won the Super Bowls, but he was putting up big numbers with big receivers like AB around him. So give your status on Ben Roethlisberger at
So
number 6.
the reason I have Ben above Lamar and I don't have Russell Wilson above Lamar is a couple of things. One, Ben played longer, had better longevity compared to Russell Wilson. Wilson's career isn't done yet, but at this point he has better longevity. And 2 Super Bowls to 1 is also a big factor there.
Okay.
So Ben Roethlisberger, I agree with everything you said. Early in his career, super efficient, great winner. There was the 04 season where he went undefeated as a starter until that 04 AFC title game. Obviously, they had the run in 05. He had a really good 07 year. They won in 08. They got back and in 2010. And then for the rest of his career, not a ton of playoff success, but
Yeah.
kept them steady in the regular season and put up some big numbers statistically. Like 2014 was a big year, 2018 was a big year. Led the league in passing twice. Had a great connection with AB. That killer B era from about 2014 to 17 was definitely a spectacle and fun to watch. There was a period from '03 to 11 where the only quarterbacks in the AFC to start Super Bowls were Brady, Manning, and Ben, and so
Yeah.
he's definitely a part of that. There are some arguments against him. You know, he didn't win Super Bowl MVP in either of his wins. He never even came close to winning a league MVP. But he was so good. He was consistently a top 10 quarterback for almost all of his career, really, until he got injured in
Yeah.
2019. For basically the first 15 years of his career, and just
I would say he was consistently like the fifth or sixth best quarterback in the
yeah,
league.
and there were definitely a couple years where he was in the top 5, and
Yeah.
so his numbers are kind of weird because efficiency wise, the best numbers of his career actually are like '04 and '05 in some aspects, but volume wise, it's like 14 and 18 and 2011 and years like that. But I think he was really a great player throughout that entire stretch until his injury. Really, top 10 all time in yards and touchdowns.
Mhm.
He has 13 playoff wins, which puts him in very good company historically.
Yeah.
In terms of it's one of the most. It's only got
Well, I
one
mean,
less.
he went to 3 Super Bowls too. People forget about that.
Yeah,
3
and
Super Bowl appearances.
if they had won in 2010, that would have been 3 in 6 years. That would have been a dynasty at that point, and he would have been
Pretty
one of the
much.
dynasty quarterbacks. And so that hurt him a little bit, but he wasn't quite, you know, ever, I would say Manning or Brady or Rodgers, but he was right below them for a very long time, and he was
Yeah.
consistently great. So
He was kind of in that weird space for me where it was like after those guys and then he was like he was like the gap. Like it was like Brady, Manning, Brees, Rodgers, and it was like Ben, and then it was like Ryan Stafford. You know, like he was like the guy in between the
yeah,
guys. You know what I'm saying?
he was
Like the
like the
tier
elite guy.
breaker.
He was the elite guy that was never the best in consideration for the best, but was always a little bit above the very good.
Yeah. At number 5, Drew Brees, who this is going to be controversial because some people think Drew Brees is a top 5 quarterback of all time, Ultra. So tell us why he's this high, but also this low at the same time.
So I got to be honest, the top 5 was the easiest part of this entire list. Like I knew instantly when I started making the list, which was the day after the Super Bowl, what my top 5 was going to be in order. And I think it's pretty obvious. You can probably figure out who the 5 guys are. I have Drew
Don't
Brees
even
at
have to
number.
spend that much time on it, to be honest.
I have Drew Brees at number 5. Won a Super Bowl, won a Super Bowl MVP, won 2 NFL Offensive Player of the Year awards, and was first team All Pro in '06. Um, Look, Drew Brees, statistically ridiculous, led the NFL in passing yards 6 times, led the NFL in completion percentage 6 times, 4 times touchdowns leader, led the NFL in rating twice. Was so good for so long. Even '04 with the Chargers was an
Yeah, he was
awesome.
good with the Chargers.
That
A
was
lot of
one of his.
fans wouldn't know that, but he was. I remember
Yeah,
even before he went to the Saints, and I remember that being a big deal. I was becoming a Saints fan because I was a huge Reggie Bush fan, and I was also like, the Chargers were one of those teams where I always kind of liked them. They were kind of underrated with LT and Drew Brees, and Brees was like in the top 5-ish discussion around like '04, '05-ish,
I
and
mean,
then
if you
yeah,
look at his era adjusted season, like '04, right? It's 11, then '09, then 18, then '04 in terms of adjusted net yards per attempt. So, like it was one of the best seasons of his career. He was great. Go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted,
yeah,
but
I mean, like, yeah, I was just gonna say like that. I don't think people know that. I think people just assume when he went to the Saints he got good, but I think he was always pretty good with the Chargers, and then he sort of took off with the Saints. But I felt like that was always one of those where like when Drew Brees went to the Saints, it was a shift. Like it was a big shift because it was like this guy's really good. Like he's gonna show how good he is. And then with Sean Payton took off. I feel like there's some seasons in there that are weird for him. that kind of helped but hurt him. There's a couple 5,000-yard seasons in like 2008 and 2011 off the top of my head. I don't know exactly where he put up crazy yards, but they didn't win.
Well,
So,
actually, those years, well, 11, they won 13 games, but 12, 14, and 16, he threw for 5,000 and they
okay.
went 7. So,
Okay. So, yeah, there were some seasons where he threw crazy numbers, but it's like he won 8 games. So, like, how much does that really matter? And then
yeah.
I'll say playing in a dome helps. It helps a little bit. It helps a
Yeah.
little bit. Playing
The
in the
other
NFC South helped a little bit, but uh,
Peyton,
I think he should have won MVP in '09, and that would
I
have been
agree.
a great season because he would have won MVP, he would have won the Super Bowl. That is the year to me that he was the best quarterback in the NFL.
I mean, let's be honest. If you're asking both Drew Brees and Peyton Manning, one guy's happier with how that season went than the other, and it's not
Yes.
Manning. And I say that as a massive Peyton Manning stan, which we'll get to soon. But Drew Brees, amazing statistical career. I agree with you. He didn't quite win at the same rate as the guys in the top 4 did in the regular season or the playoffs. And
Inconsistency.
in terms of his MVPs, I feel a little bad for him because he finished second in MVP voting, Mitch, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 separate times. So it is a little bit unfair. '09 was definitely his best argument for it. I think they went with Peyton because of all the comebacks he had that year and the fact that they just gave up on potentially going 16-0. But yeah, and in the playoffs, not a ton of playoff success. 9-9, did win that Super Bowl. Great postseason run, great Super Bowl performance. But his numbers in the postseason are really impressive. They're some of
Yeah.
the better season numbers of all time, and they're really not that much worse than his regular season numbers on a per game basis either. They're kind of the same. So really great career for Drew Brees, arguably a top 10 quarterback ever, and no doubt a top 5 quarterback since 2000.
Aaron Rodgers at number 4, the bad man. Arguably the most talented, they say. The most talented quarterback of all time because of the stylistic art of his passing. And that has honestly been replicated, I feel like, so many times by different quarterbacks after Aaron Rodgers. Like the throw style at which he throws the ball, like the actual mechanics are trying to be copied so many times over. And yeah, Aaron Rodgers, 4-time MVP, which is crazy. He's been to a ton of NFC championships, only one Super Bowl, which really hurts him. And he did win that Super Bowl. The 2010 playoffs, I felt like he was absurdly good, but just such a rocky, weird relationship with the team, the Brett Favre thing early in his career, his coaches, and then his family, like so much drama in his entire career. It's been hard to always look at Aaron Rodgers as someone that you can respect only for football and you can love for just the game. And so I've had an often rocky relationship with Aaron Rodgers because sometimes I feel like he's been too flamboyant and egotistical for my liking. Sometimes I've really liked uh that about him, but then also like just marveled at his ability, his intelligence, his accuracy. So I've had this weird relationship with Aaron Rodgers because sometimes he was compared to Brady. That certainly didn't help, but then other times it feels like he's been one of those guys that everyone's always tried to prop up, where it's like it's the talent, but then a lot of the talent has not turned into results. Then at the same time, if you just strip Tom Brady out of the conversation, the results do add up to pretty much everybody else. So it's kind of funny. I don't know. Rodgers is an interesting one. Explain why he's above Brees, but below the guys that are ahead of him.
So he's above Brees because there were more seasons in which Rodgers I would have considered the best quarterback in the NFL, and that's resulted in the 4 MVPs to 0. Now you could argue maybe Brees should have won MVP in '09 and Rodgers shouldn't have won it in 21, but that's still 3-1.
Yeah.
And Rodgers also made that 2010s All Decade team. He's one of 3 guys on this list that have been on the All Decades team. Brees did not, and so that helped him. I also felt like Rodgers and Brees both, for a lot of their kind of careers and primes, had bad defenses. Now the Saints were
Yeah.
more bad consistently than the Packers, but the Packers were consistently winning 10, 11, 12 games during the same time the Saints were winning 7 and 8.
Mm.
And it wasn't like their divisions were that much tougher. So I felt like Rodgers showed more in terms of being able to carry the team than Brees did in a more consistent basis. And there was also with Rodgers that just, and this is where the eye test comes in a little bit, the way, you know, people talk about kind of Mahomes the last couple years. When I first started watching football in 2010 and 2011 and 2012, Rodgers was that guy. Like people were convinced Rodgers after the 2010 Super Bowl and during that 2011 season, even
Yeah.
all the way like up until like 2014, that like Rodgers would become like the next Joe Montana, that he was like the best quarterback we've actually ever seen. And for a while, I really thought it was like legit because this guy was doing stuff that I have never seen people do. It was ridiculous. The way he would go out of structure and just hit Jordy Nelson 50 yards down the field effortlessly. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And his touchdown interception ratio, his ability to prevent interceptions was ridiculous. Never a huge volume guy, more of an efficiency guy.
Hmm.
There was, you're right, there was the whole thing with Favre at the start. There was the thing at his family. There was definitely McCarthy's relationship soured towards the end in Green Bay. And the last couple of years, going back to his last couple of years really in Green Bay, even when he was winning MVPs, there's always been this drama back with the Jets too. The thing with Aaron Rodgers that I've come around on, I was a bigger Aaron Rodgers fan 4 or 5 years ago than I am now. And it kind of, that last playoff game with Green Bay against the 49ers kind of changed my opinion of him and his career. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that, he doesn't have as many comebacks as a guy you would expect that's played, over 15 years in the league. Like, he's not great in crisis. Not the way that a
Mental
lot of,
strength.
yeah, it feels like when things are going well, when things are working, when everything is going according to the plan and the script, and things are working out in his team's favor, is this guy like the greatest quarterback ever? He might be. But when things are just start to break down, and you saw it in that Niner game and in that playoff game where Mercedes Lewis fumbles and the offense stops working for the entirety of the rest of the game, and it's like just what happens. And too many times in the playoffs, there it's not all on him. Obviously, there have been a lot of games that his defense was horrible, but there have also been games where he either started extremely slow, or he just didn't play up to his regular season standards, or he
Yeah.
didn't come enough late. That 2014 NFC Championship game, not on him completely because of all the weird shit that happened at the end of that game, but he was bad in that game too. So he didn't quite have, and he only got to one Super Bowl. He won it. He was great in it, but he only got to one Super Bowl in the weaker of the two conferences, I would argue, throughout his career, whereas the top three all got to at least four. That's the separator. That's the differentiator. But Aaron Rodgers, legend, arguably, top five, certainly top 10 quarterback of all time. And we'll see what happens with him right now in terms of where he signs and all that.
At number 3, Patrick Mahomes. I think we know why he's here. One of the best, if not the best, start to a career of all time. The question basically comes down to why is he above Rodgers and Brees, but why is he below Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, who I assume are second and first, unless Zach Wilson is in the top 2.
So Patrick Mahomes, number 3, the best start to a career ever, Mitch. You can say it. It's okay. He had the best start to a career ever.
He's been aided a lot.
In terms of winning, nobody's won at the rate that he's won to start his career, and no one's also had the individual accolades, and that combination's been ridiculous. Put up some amazing. The first year of his career was the best year of his career.
It honestly was. That's why
50,
he's washed now.
5,100 yards, 50 touchdowns.
He
He had
peaked too early.
more great years, 2019, 2020. 2022 might have been, in terms of start to finish, that's my favorite version of Patrick Mahomes. That was the year that I think he really put it all together in terms of he still had every bit of the creativity and the flair and I don't give a fuck. I can make this throw from anywhere on the field that he did in 2018, but he walked the line better. He was more efficient. He was more refined in 2022. And he resulted in the most successful year of his career, league MVP and a Super Bowl MVP. Last couple years hasn't been the same, not the same statistically, but has made a lot of plays towards the end of games, has won a lot, gotten to 2 Super Bowls, won one in 23. Um, so the reason I have him above Brees is simply because he's just won at so much of a higher rate than Brees. And statistically, Brees does have him in some aspects Mahomes has him. But the league MVPs too, the fact that he's clearly been the best not just he's been the best quarterback, but there are multiple years where it's just not even a debate, not even an arguable point that he's the best quarterback compared to that was never the case with Brees. With
Okay.
Rodgers, you can make a real argument that Rodgers is still above Mahomes, in my opinion, because of the longevity, because Rodgers does still have some more, like individual accolade advantages over Mahomes that Brees doesn't have. What kind of came down, and this, you can nitpick this,
Okay.
in crisis, there have just been so many moments where Mahomes, late in a game, in a playoff game, he's made comebacks, all the double-digit comebacks we've seen with Mahomes, how good he's been in the playoffs. Like if you look at his playoff numbers, they're somehow a little better on a per-game basis than his regular season numbers, which is not the case for any of the other guys in this top five. He is, in terms of a per-game basis, him and Allen are the two greatest playoff quarterbacks ever. Now, a Super Bowl career has been uneven.
So
He's had
strange.
he's had one great Super Bowl, I would argue, against the Eagles. You can whine about the yards, his efficiency, and some of the runs late in that game. He had a pretty solid one. The second Niner one, the first Niner one was bad until the end. Then he had two complete disasters. But in terms of the playoffs, I just think he's been better than Rodgers. He's already the fact that they're in the conference championship game every year with this guy has been ridiculous. The reason he's not above Brady is because obviously he's not above Brady. He hasn't done anything, that's not really a conversation. And then Manning, I have Manning above him because of the longevity, because Manning, in terms of his accolades, are still better than Mahomes, but he also got deeper in terms of getting to Super Bowls 4 times as many as Rodgers did. And I also feel like, and I'll get to this in Peyton Manning, I feel like you can make a strong argument he's the most valuable player in NFL history, evidenced by all the MVPs he won. And statistically, he was more impressive than Mahomes for his era. So I think Manning was, we'll get to Manning, but Mahomes in 5 years, he'll probably be second on this
Here's
list,
the
and
thing.
he probably will
How
retire.
will he age? Because and that's been the debate. I've made these videos already this offseason, is like, will he continue to regress this way, where his game is just not the same as it used to be? Like statistically, like by evidence of his play on the field, it feels like he's not the same player he was in 2022. It felt like he was going like this. And then now it's like, and despite the championship, his individual play has
The
gone like
winning
this.
hasn't been affected, but his statistics
Yes.
have fallen off.
Yeah, and it feels like they've won because of different reasons. I think you could make an argument. I think when you compare Rodgers and Mahomes, I would argue that Rodgers is the better pure quarterback. But
I agree.
I think that there is as you didn't put it this way, but you basically said like in the big moments, Mahomes is more inevitable. Like,
Mahomes is a lot better in crisis than Rodgers is.
and I think that's a fair argument as to why he's above Rodgers. I think it is very debatable. So we'll let people say in the comments which one they would prefer, Rodgers or Mahomes. We'll move to 2.
Real quickly, before we get to 2, I wanted to ask you, because number 2 took 8 years to win his first Super Bowl and then 9 years to win his second one. And
Yeah.
then number 1 went 10 years between his third and fourth. Could you see a near decade, if not decade long gap for Mahomes the way Manning and Brady had throughout their careers?
Yeah, it's not a given that he'll win another Super Bowl. It really isn't, because the NFL is not made for you to win this much at this
The
high of
fact
a
that he's
rate.
won 3 is like only like
Yeah,
4 guys have won more.
exactly. But then also you're kind of looking at the trajectory of the team too. It's like, well, now they're a Super Bowl loser. How hard is it to get back to the Super Bowl after you lost the Super Bowl? And Mahomes has already done it, right? Hasn't he?
He didn't get back after losing because they lost to the Bengals the year after they
Right.
lost the Bucs.
So, yeah, we'll see if he's able to do that, which it feels like they're at another transition phase now. So we'll see if he's able to do that. But then you've got the whole Andy Reid discussion, the Travis Kelce discussion. Chris Jones is getting older. You have to be insulated with players around you to win, especially what we've seen from Mahomes lately. It's not like he's been marginally better than Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow, like maybe he was at some point in his career. So he could still go on to win a couple more Super Bowls, but it feels like he's going to
I
have
think
to get a really good situation once again around him.
And I think what we're saying right now with Mahomes is he's still clearly one of the best quarterbacks in the league, in my opinion. But the aura of inevitability with him is kind of gone after the way that Super Bowl went.
It just
Right
feels different. It feels
you can't,
lucky. Like it's weird.
you can't 2 years ago, there was no person on earth that would have said anyone other than Mahomes was the best quarterback in the NFL. You can't say that anymore. You can make a real argument for Lamar and Josh Allen both right now.
At number 2, Peyton Manning. Why is he above Patrick Mahomes?
Because Peyton Manning, and this was the inspiration to this list, because Tom Brady because we do the whole GOAT thing, and we were doing it so much before the Super Bowl and in the week after the Super Bowl. Tom Brady gets disrespected, gets in some ways underrated, in some ways he gets overrated.
Outrageous.
But he still gets discussed a ton. Peyton Manning, it feels like, just gets driven over in terms of like when we're talking about I feel like everyone has him seemingly in their top 5, but no one discusses him anymore, Mitch. It's sad. This guy, I was watching the 4th and 2 game, the 2009 Colts Patriots game. Great game. Go watch it on YouTube. It's one of the better regular season games of the 2000s. The way this guy would just be screaming at Jeff Saturday, calling out plays. He was the best. Not only was he the best quarterback of the 2000s, he was the best offensive coordinator of the 2000s. He was ridiculous. There is no, and Tom Brady said it when Manning attended when they retired Brady's jersey with the Patriots. Tom Brady said there's no one like Peyton Manning in the NFL today, and that's true. And I don't think there will ever be another Peyton Manning.
No.
In terms of what this guy did, in terms of his influence on football, what he did with everything with Omaha, with calling, with making checks at the line, with adjusting protections. There was nobody better at avoiding sacks than Peyton Manning. Never got sacked, ever. You know his accolades: 7 first-team All-Pros, 5 NFL MVPs, won 2 Super Bowls, Super Bowl MVP in Super Bowl 41. Led the league in yards 3 times, touchdowns 4 times, rating 3 times. If you want to ask, like, there was nobody that was considered, I think, the best quarterback in the league more since 2000 than Peyton Manning has been in more seasons. That is a fact to me. Even Tom Brady. In terms of like technically sound playing the position, who do I think was actually the best at playing the position at their peak? I would argue it's Peyton Manning. I would. Now,
I would not.
He's not number 1 because like Tom Brady he won so much more, and he was better in the Super Bowls and in the big moments. And Manning never had one postseason run that ended in a Super Bowl that was dominant. 2009 was the closest he came, but then after all year being the most clutch player in the league, he had the worst clutch moment of his career with the pick 6 to Tracy Porter. That hurts him. And that, I think that's basically all of the argument against Peyton Manning, is he was never as good in the big moments as he should have been. Not that he didn't have it, because he had several very good playoff moments, but he just didn't have as many as you would have wanted, and he had more bad moments than you would have wanted. But his value, man, like their years late in the 2000s, like look at some of the Colts look at that 2010 Colts roster. They won 10 games, lost a game to the Jets that they shouldn't have lost in the wild card round. That was not that different to the 2011 team that was the worst team in the league, and they won 10 games. The Colts could not have survived without Peyton Manning being their quarterback for so many years. So don't forget, because everyone wanted to just put Patrick Mahomes everyone wants to put him as the second greatest quarterback already. I think not only does it disrespect guys before this list like Montana and United, it disrespects what Peyton Manning did. and everything that he achieved and how good this guy was. He was the LeBron James of the NFL for 15 years. And it just it saddens me sometimes that people, and again, I didn't watch his entire career. I watched his Denver years where he was still awesome, still broke the record for yards and touchdowns in a season. That's another thing with him. He's the only quarterback in NFL history that you can argue multiple of his seasons were the best in NFL history, whether it's 04 or 13. No, they can't say that for anyone else. So this guy, undoubted legend, arguably top 5 all time in terms of NFL players, not just quarterback. Nobody, I think, added more value to their team in terms of what they meant to their team. And from an individual perspective, maybe the greatest ever, but didn't quite win enough, didn't quite come through in as many postseason moments. And the guy at number 1 just did so many other ridiculous things that it's not become a debate. It was a real debate about through about 2013. If I were making this list, I could have made a lot of people would have had Peyton Manning number 1 above Tom Brady. Mitch, you remember this? This was a real debate until
This was
that
a real debate. Yeah, no, Peyton
Seattle Super Bowl.
until the 2014 until the
Yeah,
Patriots beat the Seahawks, Peyton would have been considered overall the better player. Although I think Brady did pass him for a brief period, like when
around well,
around 2011.
if we're kind of going through it, 03, 04, even though Brady was winning, most people thought Manning was still greater.
And this also had to do with how they were looked at previous to getting drafted.
Yeah,
That did have a big factor, but
his
Peyton was considered better than Brady
oh
until
06, 06, Peyton was definitely after the Super Bowl considered better. 07, Brady had a chance, I think, if they'd have won.
I think 07 it flipped where Brady went on top of Manning. Then Brady was considered the better quarterback. I would say, like, historically speaking, through 2011,
No, but 08 and 09. 08 and 09, I think it flipped back when Manning went back to
maybe
back.
that's possible. Yeah, it kept flipping from really like
08, 09,
07,
flipped back to
08,
Manning.
09, 10 when Brady won
10, 11,
unanimous
10,
MVP.
11 went back to Brady. 12, 13 went back to Manning, and then
Yeah,
14
yeah,
the comeback.
yeah. That's probably pretty correct.
Um,
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I'll
But
let
yeah,
Mitch
and just
Peyton.
just to finish this off with Peyton, I think the thing that frustrates me about the conversation is I hate this idea that the way that quarterbacks play nowadays is like somehow better than how Peyton Manning played the position. I hate that concept. I hate that idea. I think it's totally incorrect. Like, as a Patriots fan, although we used to beat Peyton quite often, I feel like there was nobody that in going into the game, there was more anticipation. And during the game, there's nobody that was really like scarier. And that includes everybody that the Patriots have played. And it was because of the way that he could control the game and really the way that he would be able to pace the game. And that included the way that he would throw the ball, his understanding of situations, like just his ability to take care of the ball, his ability to use his weapons around him in a unique way of understanding matchups, which I think only Brady has done at a similar level, where he would just pick on a certain matchup or a certain route or something, and it was all stemming from him. And I don't think, I think one area where he's not quite Brady is like, I think he was never good outdoors in bad weather because his arm strength
I
deteriorated.
think that's a little bit because he played in Denver and he was awesome.
But when it was really snowing or raining or like
I
really not
guess.
in the early portions of the season, but later in
I
the
think he got.
schedule,
I think he got better at it throughout his career, but it was definitely a thing at some
because
point.
he never had truly elite arm strength. His game was always about timing, anticipation, accuracy. He was a lot like Joe Burrow is today. Like, I don't think Burrow would be considered to have like a cannon. I think Manning had a good arm, but like I think a difference of being like Peyton, and that was a big discussion point between him and Brady, was like Peyton always had weapons and played in a dome, while Brady had
Yeah,
the defense and played outdoors on like the most ridiculously ugly field you've ever seen. And it was like such a counter like
and then Brady had
argument.
Belichick, and Peyton took 4 different coaches to. It
Yeah.
was what Dungy or Jim Caldwell, and then it was
And I
was
just think the thing I want to nail down is like, I just hate this concept that because a player can run around for 10 seconds and throw the ball off
no.
his back foot,
I
that he's a
agree with
better player. I hate
the
this
way
idea.
Peyton Manning played the game was more effective than the way all the guys who run
And
around
it's
play.
indicated by the stats. I don't care if they played now or late, like earlier. Like, I don't care if you would have put that, like, Peyton in the NFL now. I still feel like he'd put up the
If he
numbers
were
he
in the
did then.
NFL now, Mitch, they would the stats would be ridiculous with the
Yes,
extra
and the
game.
stats have gone down if you've noticed. At number 1, Tom Brady, we don't really even need to discuss this.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you one thing. Is there anything you learned about Tom Brady, if you even did any research for this, that you can that is interesting?
So here's a couple of things I learned. Number one, a year that you always talk about as like kind of a down year for Tom Brady is 2009.
Okay.
2009 Tom Brady, if you look at like DVOA and DYAR, it's like one of the best years of his damn career.
It was a down year, bro.
But it's one of the best. I mean, it's like I mean, there was never a point where Tom Brady was ever bad at football, which is something you can't say about Peyton Manning. Um, no, I mean, we all know about Tom Brady, statistically ridiculous, has 3 different Hall of Fame careers, was the quarterback of multiple dynasties. If that, I don't know how that's possible, but he was the
Yeah,
early aughts
for the
and the
same
mid
team.
2010s. Um, Statistically, I did learn that like and I'm not trying to hate, but like his playoff numbers took a bit of a hit from his regular season. His passer rating went from 97 to 90. His completion percentage dropped a little bit. The yards per attempt dropped a little bit.
But
I'm not
Ultra, I would make an
I'm not,
argument that from
yeah.
2014 through the rest of his career, his playoff numbers are the best of all time. If you actually look at it from that
That's
perspective.
fair. Or I think
Early portions, you know why I think it was? The weather was consistently awful and
that's
they
true.
always played great defenses.
But there were some moments throughout his statistical prime from about '07 through 12 that were some
Yeah.
pretty there were some bad moments in there. But again, the guy could have retired in '07 and have been a unanimous Hall of Famer. So
Yeah.
I think Mahomes had a chance. If Mahomes had beaten the Eagles and he'd have three-peated, he'd have had a chance to potentially pass Brady by the end of his career. I think it's done now. I don't think unless he somehow gets 8, which I don't see happening, or he gets
Yeah.
like 10 MVPs or something. I don't see how it happens. So I think Tom Brady now on lock as the GOAT, and we don't have to discuss it for at least another half decade.
All right. There it is. It was an extremely long discussion. Good debate. I hope everybody that watched it enjoyed it. If you did
Real
watch
quickly,
until
real
the end, comment TB12 in the comments. Ultra.
So I plugged this in to AI because I wanted to see how this list would change in 5 years. So I asked them to project what this list would look like in 5 years. So I'll just read it out real quick and you can give me your initial reaction. I'll go from 25 to 21 and go by 5. So 25, they have Jordan Love. 24, Steve McNair. 23, Cam. 22, Tua. 21, Trevor Lawrence. That's
Okay,
where
let's forget about it.
where AI is right now.
All right,
Um,
thanks AI. You don't have a job on the bottom line view. Gronk spike the like button. This is probably going to be 2 parts. I mean, this was long, so this is probably going to be 2-parter that I'll post on the channel. Thanks guys for watching. Shout out to Ultra for making this list. It was awesome, and hopefully we can do some in the future. Peace, guys. See you later.